Okay, so can we just turn that down a bit? Hello, everyone. Uh, really exciting to have you guys here today. My name is Blessing, and as the fashion in Assad, we would like to start today with a short word of prayer. So just give me about 1 minute, and let's just bow our heads to pray. Our Father in heaven, we want to give you all the praise and honor today. We thank you for making this day be. We appreciate your name for all that you've done. Thank you for a beautiful day. Father, we want to commit today's session into your hands. We want to ask that you take control. We ask that you use our speaker to address the concerns of our hearts and you teach us valuable lessons through her. We hope that at the end of today, we'll have every cause to glorify your name. In Jesus' mighty name, we prayed.
Amen.
Amen. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to call on Henrietta. Henrietta, can you hear me?
Yeah, I
Yes.
can.
So I'm going to call on Henrietta to just give us a brief overview of Assad, what we do, and what we are.
Okay. So good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening. Thank you so much for joining us on today's section on letting go, overcoming guilt, shame, and self-blame. So Asads basically stands for Anti-Suicide and Depression Squad, and it's an NGO organization whereby we raise awareness about suicide and depression. Every 40 seconds, someone takes their life for different reasons due to suicide, due to something they've done in the past, and you're feeling so let down about it and not letting go about the mistakes they've done. So that leads to depression, which makes them commit suicide. So we are over 300 million plus in Nigeria and not even up to 300 mental health professionals, which is extremely poor. So in ASAD, we raise awareness that, okay, yes, mental health is very much important and mental illnesses exist. And it doesn't make you a mad person, doesn't make you a bad person, you're human. And it's an organization whereby we teach people, we educate people, we are there to listen to people about whatever they are going through. And also, if you would like to volunteer, there are various departments if you're interested in, you can check us on Instagram at Asads. Then you can check us on YouTube, on LinkedIn, on Twitter. And you can also send us an email attached with your CV if you're interested in joining any departments of your choice. So please do well to get your notepad and your pen and also your bottle of water ready because this section is going to be a very, very educative section. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Henrietta. Um, yeah, so I just want to go further to say that Assad is mostly, focused on just making sure that people's mental health is, you know, on a better standing. Everybody knows what's happening in the country right now, and we obviously know how that could affect us. So one of the things that Assad is concentrating on or concentrates on is making sure that even though there's so much noise around you, in your head, there's some peace, there's some quiet, you're not overwhelmed, and you can just breeze through life without feeling like there's this form of suffocation. So I'm going to call on Jude right now to give us a brief overview on our speaker, uh, Miss Amanda Iheme. Jude, take it up from here, please.
All right. Good evening, everyone. So I'll be introducing our guest speaker for today, Ms. Amanda Iheme. Amanda Iheme is a licensed clinical psychologist and an architecture photographer in Lagos with a master's degree in abnormal and clinical psychology from Swansea University Amanda has over 7 years of experience in mental health. She's the clinical director and the lead clinical psychologist of INDD, a private mental health practice where she works with private clients suffering from depression, anxiety, grief, trauma, and existential crisis. She also provides psychotherapy and consultation services for corporate firms and facilitates private and public lectures. Please join me in welcoming Amanda Iheme.
Oh, hello. Sorry, I was muted. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, and thank you so much for having me here today. It's always a pleasure to work with Asads, and I'm always so grateful when I get a chance to have conversations with people about mental wellness and things pertaining to our well-being. So for today's conversation, we'll be talking about guilt, shame, and self-blame. Now, when I was preparing for this, I was like, okay, how am I gonna talk about all three subjects together? And I decided that, self-blame, guilt, and shame all have the same aspects connected with them. So if I talk about guilt or I talk about shame, I'm still going to enter that subject of self-blame. So it's all going to be connected together. Now, the way I'm going to speak about it is I want to touch on them individually so that we have a good idea of what each subject is about before. And then during your questions, you can have questions about how they either intersect or how to deal with the both of them at the same time. But we're going to talk about them individually. So we're going to look at what exactly is guilt, what is shame, and then how we can both cope with each of them one by one. Okay. I'm also going to ask for some grace. I can't turn on my video at the moment. I recently just finished a therapy session and I'm in transition because the session lasted longer than it should have. So I've been in transition. So I'm not in a decent enough space to turn on my video. So when I am in a much more decent environment to turn my video on, I would, but I can't do that at the moment. So we're just going to have the audio on. So I'm going to start first of all with talking about what guilt is. And I'm sure every single one of us is very familiar with the concept of guilt. It's a normal human emotion that it's not strange to any of us, but the time when it becomes a problem is when guilt begins to have such a negative impact on our lives that it becomes difficult for us to move on and move forward. So I want to talk to us about what guilt is, what are some of the things that can cause us to feel guilty, and how best to manage and respond to guilt. If you have any questions for me, you can leave it in the chat box, or you can just take note of it so that when we get to the Q&A section, we'll then be able to answer them much better with much detail. Okay, great. So first of all, what is guilt? Now, guilt is a normal human reaction to feeling responsible or feeling regret for a perceived, real, or imagined problem. Like I said before, perceived, real, or imaginary problem. It's a normal reaction. So I wanted to highlight those 3 points very much. Perceived, real, and imagined, because this is very important. There are times when we feel guilty for things that we're not sure if we did something wrong or we did something right. Because we're having a conversation with a friend and a friend might say or start to treat us a certain way, or they don't talk to us anymore. And then we start to feel guilty. We're like, what did I do? What did I do? Now, it is a perception because there is no convincing, nobody has come and say, oh, this is something that you've done that has definitely affected me. You either perceive it from the way a person is behaving, how they are treating you, or how they are reacting. Then it can be from a real situation where you were supposed to do something or be somewhere or just show up in a way. And what ended up happening is that it didn't work out in that way. You didn't show up the way you were supposed to. And so because of that, there is a real reason why you can feel guilty. Then there is now imagined. Imagined is sometimes can sound like a perceived sense of guilt. And what that means is that you on your own, because you're like, oh, this is the type of situation that somebody will most likely feel guilty for, you then start to feel guilty for it. It could also be a situation where a person, you might just be sitting on your own and then think of, sorry guys, please just give me a second here. I just want to navigate something in the environment I'm in. I'll join you shortly.
Until she gets back, I hope we're all getting our questions ready. If you have any questions you would like to ask, please kindly drop it on the chat in the chat box while she's ongoing, so she could answer whatever questions you have during the question and answer section. Thank you so much. I'm so sorry for the disruption. We really do apologize. Thanks.
Okay, I'm back. So sorry, guys. Thank you for your patience. So yeah, like I was saying, guilt can be felt in an imaginary, in a perceived, and in a real situation. Now, with the imaginary, it's important for us to talk about this part because one thing is like our brain cannot decide between what is real and what is imagined. We are the ones who are conscious and are processing this that can know if a situation is imagined or if it is real, which is why sometimes you can be sitting down on your own and merely just imagining, someone will just be like, imagine you could just have an accident right now and somebody hits you and you fall down. You can almost feel yourself having that same visceral reaction as if you had just had an accident. Or if someone says, oh, there's a wall gecko in front of you and you're the type of person that is afraid of wall geckos. The person just like, there's a wall gecko in front of you. Next thing you start shouting. You didn't even see it. But simply because somebody said it is there, without even convincing yourself that this is a real situation, you would have a reaction to it. So sometimes we can also imagine situations that are not in front of us, and our behavior would be as a response as if they were actually happening to us. This can also happen with emotions of guilt. So you can feel guilty for an imagined situation. You can be sitting down and just feel like, just imagine if this will not happen and that will not happen. Oh my God, I feel guilty about it. And people do have a tendency of believing the imaginations that come up in their mind, which is why some of us are very anxious. There is nothing around us triggering our anxiety, but because we can imagine how a situation can turn out badly. What if as I'm just going down now on the road, one trailer just comes and hits me now? Oh my God, then your heart starts to race, your hands get clammy, you start to feel unsafe in the environment that you're in. No accident has happened. Nothing wrong has gone on in your environment, but you have simply imagined something going on. And as a result of that, you are having a visceral reaction to it. It can happen even in relationships as well. Your partner hasn't shown you any sign or any evidence of wrongdoing, or they've not even done anything at all, but simply because you're like, I'm afraid, what if this person just treats me like this or says this thing to me this way or does this or that or the other? And then you now begin to react as if they have already done this to you. So it's very possible for us to have emotional responses to imagined situation. And this also applies in the area of guilt. You can feel guilty for something that you perceive, maybe through somebody's actions, their response, their behavior, and then you feel guilty because of it. It could be a real thing that they told you that you've done that's hurt their feelings, and it could also be a completely imagined situation. Now, when we feel guilty or we feel a sense of guilt, it's very important for us to ask ourselves the question first, what made us feel this way before we begin to react? Many of us, when we have situations and we feel something, the next thing we're towards is a quick reaction. This is how I feel. Let me go and solve the problem. This is how I feel. This is what somebody said. I'm sure that they believe this. I'm sure they are thinking this of me. I'm sure that this is exactly what's happening. We react based on our own imaginations of what a situation is like. We're not really taking our time to know if this is real, if it is not, and even what role we actually play in this dynamic. So when you start to feel guilty, it helps to just take a moment to sit with yourself and ask yourself, what exactly about this situation has made me feel guilty? Is it perceived? Am I observing it am I feeling guilty because of something, the way somebody is treating me, and then I feel guilty because I know that there's something that I've done wrong? Or is it imagined where, this thing has never even happened, or I was just thinking about one, two, three, and then this is what then caused it to happen? Or is it a real situation where, okay, something really, really happened that I've done wrong, and as a result of that, that's why I feel guilty. I deserve to feel guilty because of this particular thing. So it's important to ask yourself that question. Is it perceived? Is it real, or is it imagined? Because that can then help you decide how best to respond. If it is a perceived sense of guilt where, it's just based off of, my friend is treating me this way, or somebody's acting some type of way, or I feel guilty because I know that there was something I said I was going to do that I did not end up doing. And because of that, now I feel guilty. Then it's important for you to now begin to address it, and to address it directly, not address it through the corners, not to run around it, but to face what exactly it is that you think might be causing you that sense of guilt. If it is imagined, then you have to then, calm yourself down and recognize that, oh man, this has not happened. Or let me just breathe and relax. Let me not just go and be looking for trouble that does not exist in my life, where trouble is not supposed to be existing. And then if it is real, then you have that conversation with the person that you had it with, that made you, or address the situation that's making you feel guilty. So when you start to feel guilty, before you respond, it helps to pause and ask that question of, where does it come from? Typically, guilt comes from a sense of responsibility, either from our own actions. Guilt comes from a sense of responsibility that has to do with our own actions. And typically, it's around, what did you do that you were not supposed to do? Or what did you not do that you were supposed to do? So whenever you feel guilty about something, it's from that sense of responsibility that something you were supposed to do, you didn't do it, or something you were not supposed to do, you did it. And because of that, you feel guilty. Whenever people talk about why they feel, I feel bad for what I did, or I feel bad for how I said this, or how I reacted, or how I showed up, guilt is from that place of a sense of responsibility. Now, to cope with guilt, you have to respond with action. So when you know that, okay, this is either a perceived guilt or is a real guilt, and if it's perceived, you've addressed it and you found that is real, you then have to address it. And it requires action as a response, because guilt comes from a sense of responsibility, what you did that you are not supposed to do, or what you did not do that you ended up doing, or something that you've done that you've made yourself feel like you've fallen short of yourself. You have to then react from that place of taking accountability, being responsible, and owning up to it and apologizing for it. You cannot respond to guilt by hiding and running from the thing that you've done that's made you feel guilty. Sometimes some of us will feel guilt, and instead of us addressing it, what we'll say is, oh my God, well, but I didn't do it now. I didn't, but you feel bad, and you know that you've done something to make somebody else feel bad, or you haven't done something that has made somebody else feel bad. And because we feel so much shame for this thing that we did or did not do, instead of us to own up to it and then say, okay, I will handle it, I will show up, I will address it, we try to find ways to avoid it and not take responsibility. That will not help you at all. So to help yourself, what is important for you to do when you feel guilty? Sorry, trying to put my lights well. I don't know if it's showing properly. Oh my God, my background is still the fundraiser from last year. So when you feel guilty, the best and most important thing to do is to take accountability for what you've done and be responsible, own up to it. Feeling guilt, now this is where the two of them link. Feeling guilt can also make you feel ashamed. It's like, oh my God, I can't believe that I messed up this bad, and somebody else is calling me out for how badly I messed up about something. We can then begin to feel guilty and then say, oh no, I feel ashamed. I'm not going to address it. I'm just going to move on from it. Or I'm just going to act like it never even happened, just so that, no foul, no harm. Let me just let it go and let it be. It doesn't help, because interpersonal relationships begin to suffer. Trust in the relationship begins to get affected, and the likes of it. So when you feel guilty, atone for this by taking accountability for how you either showed up or did not show up that has led to the situation that you are in. All right. So I'm just going to go over what I said before. That guilt comes from when we fall short, and from a sense of responsibility about things we did that we were not supposed to do, and things that we did not do that things that we did not do that we were supposed to do. Now, guilt is as a result of two processes. When we sit back and think about it, it's because, number one, we have standards that we hold ourselves to, and we have standards and expectations that the world holds us to. So, and these expectations could easily just be what someone has asked you to do. And the standards you hold yourself to is how you think your life should go. So let's look at guilt from an existential perspective. There are some times when we feel guilty because, oh, I'm expected to have this particular thing accomplished in my life. I'm supposed to have done this, or I'm supposed to have achieved that, and I haven't done it. So I feel like, I feel guilty for not giving people what they expect of me, or I feel guilty for not giving my mother a child, or getting married when they wanted me to, that sort of stuff. So we tend to feel guilty because of certain expectations that people have about us, or expectations that we have for ourselves. So when we have to sit back and then evaluate guilt so that we can know how best to respond, it is important for us to ask that question of, how are we interpreting these standards that we have set for ourselves? How are we interpreting these standards and expectations that the community or the person or even us have set for ourselves? So if they're asking us, oh, can you do this? And you're saying, oh, I can't do this. Is it because that's not what you want to do, or that's the kind of thing you want to do? So it's important for us to also ask ourselves these questions like, okay, these things that I want to live up to now, or this responsibility that they're giving to me, is it really something that I know that I can achieve? Or is it something that aligns with my own way of seeing the world, or holding myself like, this is the standard I've said, I must fit into this, I must accomplish this goal? Are those standards good for me? Because some of us carry guilt for things that we should not be feeling guilty about. But because we know that's what's expected of us, we then start to feel a sense of guilt regarding that. So it is important for us to confront guilt rather than escape guilt. As with almost every emotion, avoidant behavior, trying to escape from it, trying to run from it, never works out. It never works out. If your coping mechanism for a troubling situation is avoidance or escape, then you need to reevaluate that, because you're not coping, you're just running. You're running from the problem, and problems never vanish. So the same thing with guilt. If you know that there is some deep, deep guilt that is in your heart that you need to address, but you've been avoiding it because, I feel so bad. I can't believe I did this. I let myself down. I disappointed myself. I disappointed somebody else. Don't run from that. Sit with yourself. Evaluate it. Why do I feel guilty about this? What do I need to take accountability for and responsibility for? We can also feel guilty even when we've done things to people that we didn't intend to do that would hurt them. You can hurt people without intending to. Sometimes you might say, oh, okay, let me just, go to this place and run these other errands before I meet this person, because I think it would make my conversation with them a lot better and easier. And the person is like, oh my God, I can't believe that you left me here, you abandoned me, and da 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 da. And you're just like, I was doing this because I thought it would make the situation easier for us. I wouldn't have a lot of things weighing on my mind. I can focus on us. And they're like, no, this just made me feel abandoned. And then you start to feel bad because you've hurt somebody else's feelings. It is very possible for that to happen. So when those type of situations present themselves, and you need to sit and ask yourself, why do I feel guilty? When you then find out why you feel guilty, it helps you then know how to apportion responsibility in situations of that nature. So you can be able to tell yourself, oh, okay, the reason I feel guilty is because this person said I made them feel bad, but I didn't intend to make them feel bad. My intention was different. So what I would do, instead of avoiding and being like, well, I didn't intend to do it, oh my goodness, and let me just leave it alone and just run away because they can feel bad if they want to, that wouldn't help. Rather, acknowledge the fact that, okay, it wasn't my intention. I recognize that your feelings were hurt, but it wasn't my intention to hurt you. And I'm sorry that me responding to this way actually did
hurt your feelings. Avoiding never works. It only just creates more pain than it's not supposed to. So if you are taking avoidance as a way of coping with your problems, you are only creating more problems for yourself. So confrontation of your own feelings and thoughts and behavior is helpful. Then the guilt trap. Sometimes people can manipulate guilt. They can make you feel bad for things you should not feel bad about. And sometimes, based on our own evaluation of our behavior, our evaluation can be disordered. And when our own evaluation, so before I get to the manipulation part, I want to look at our own behavior. So when our own behavior, when it comes to guilt, is disordered, we find that we either avoid dealing with guilt, like I said before, or we overcompensate. So because this person feels bad, that you feel bad that you hurt their feelings, and even though you didn't intend to, or you didn't show up the way you wanted to, like in a case of, let's say, a family now, a woman has a child and she's not in a good place to take care of the child, and then she gives the child up for adoption, and then she comes back later into the child's life. She may then find that she's trying to overcompensate for all the time when she was not in the child's life. Even with fathers too, you can find that sometimes this person has been an absent father, he wasn't prepared to be a parent, and he ended up being a parent, or he was dealing with some personal issues, and then he's come back to his child's life. But instead of being a helpful parent, he then tries to overcompensate by doing too much, or anything the child asks for, they will give. There are no boundaries, no limits, no sense of organization, nothing. They just give because they're trying to make up for all of the times that they were not present for the child. They feel guilty about that. So sometimes when we feel guilty, some of us will avoid, after evaluating, we'll avoid and run away from it. And then on the other half, some of us will overcompensate for the behavior. So this is why I reiterate that an evaluation and a reevaluation is very important. Now, you may not also have a clear mind because of how overwhelming the emotion might be. You may not have that clear mind to be able to evaluate it and see properly, like, okay, this is the best way to deal with the problem. I need to take accountability for it. I need to show up for myself this way or show up for this person this way because of all the feelings we're having. So it helps to always have somebody that you can run these thoughts and feelings by, which is why we encourage people to speak up. Speaking up isn't just simply for, I want to share my feelings and I want to share my thoughts and I want to be open and vulnerable. It also helps because then you get a chance to really sit down and get another perspective that says, maybe look at things from this way. Let me look at things from this other angle to see if there is a solution on this part that I might be missing out, or a perspective that I'm not even conscious of because my brain is currently in a very emotional state. So opening up and talking to other people about how you feel and what you're struggling with can also help you as you decide how to respond to a situation where you feel guilty about. So, and then also having a therapist can also help. Now, when we then come down to the manipulation of guilt is very common. And Nigerian parents do this a lot of times. When they try to get you to do something, they make you feel guilty about it. Something like a parent can be like, wow, so you don't love me. That's why you don't want to do this thing. You don't want to give me money. You don't want to disrespect your boundaries for me. You don't want to do this other thing I've asked of you. Even friends, even partners can do that. When they'll say like, oh, wow, because you don't care about me, that's why you don't want to do this thing I've asked you. You don't care about our relationship and our marriage. That's why you don't want to do this. So the people can manipulate your emotions to make you feel guilty for things you should not feel guilty about, simply because they want to take advantage of you and advantage of the way that you feel so that they can get their own way. This is also another situation where having someone to talk to, especially a professional who can help you look at the situation from a third-party point of view and a holistic perspective, can be very helpful. That's why I encourage people, like, if you are in a relationship, have good, healthy friendships so that when something happens in your relationship, you can run it by a friend that you trust, that really has your own interest at heart, and say, oh, is this thing normal? Like, the way I feel, is it wrong? Am I right? What did this, like, the way I handled this person is asking me to do this thing and I don't know how I feel about it, but they're making me feel bad about it. Like, what do you think? And be open to other people's opinions so that you too can receive what is being offered. So it's one thing when you're asking for help and then you just shut down. If people are trying to let you see things, you now shut down the entire information. That's not helpful. Then why did you come to meet me if you're not going to at least even listen to what I have to say to you? So have someone around you who can help you evaluate your own emotions so that you can decide what is the healthiest way for you to respond to it. So that is what I have in terms of guilt, coping with guilt, that the best way to handle guilt is one, take accountability. So sorry, one, take a step back, evaluate to ask yourself the questions, why do I feel guilty? Is it a perceived situation? Is it a realistic situation where someone has spoken to me about it? Or have I just imagined this in my head? If it is perceived, have a conversation with who you think you're perceiving it with. If it is real, confront the situation. If it is imagined, relax, calm yourself down to recognize that this thing I'm feeling guilty for, it hasn't even happened. So there's no point carrying problem from the future that's not going to benefit me. Then if it is a real situation or a perceived one that you've had a conversation and you realize like, okay, there's something that's happened here where I'm either in the wrong or I've hurt somebody without intending to, take accountability, own up to it and just be like, and acknowledge their feelings. Like, I'm so sorry that this actually happened. It wasn't my intention, or I'm sorry that I did this thing and I know it hurt your feelings and I apologize for it. Now be conscious of how you respond. Are you the type of person that when you find out that you're guilty of something, you avoid it? Avoidance never works. Come and face the problem. Secondly, are you overcompensating? That doesn't work either, because then you begin to people please and disrespect your boundaries. So come back and then apologize, acknowledge it, take accountability, and then begin the work of moving on. Another thing about guilt is that, and I'm going to bring this up in shame as well, is that self-forgiveness can also be a significant part of letting go of guilt, because sometimes we can do things to people that hurt their feelings and these people will let it go. They're just like, you know what, it's fine, you said you were sorry, okay, I've moved on. But then the thing is that even after other people have forgiven you, you're still feeling that guilt on the inside, and it can be because you yourself have not forgiven yourself. You have not allowed yourself to say, okay, you messed up. I'm so sorry. Like, I messed up. I went against my own standards. I treated somebody else poorly. I didn't show up the way I said I was going to show up. I didn't handle a situation the way I expected myself to handle it, or the right way to handle it. And I feel terrible. I know the other person has forgiven me, but I need to forgive myself so I can move forward. We haven't taken out the time to do that. So some of us carry guilt that really just comes from our own inability to let go of it within ourselves. So doing that work of self-forgiveness, practicing self-forgiveness is important. And this will also play out when we have the conversation about shame. So self-forgiveness pretty much looks like the same way if a friend offends you, you reach out to them and be like, hey, you've done something to me that's really hurt my feelings. I feel bad about it. And then you tell them, I'm so sorry. And then when you forgive them, it is you essentially saying that I've let this go and I'm willing to move on from it. That is the same thing. That's what self-forgiveness is. So turn, instead of your friend being on that side, put yourself on the other end and then replay that. Okay, I've done this to hurt your feelings. I'm really sorry. I forgive myself for it. So that's what self-forgiveness is like. So self-forgiveness, confrontation, and reevaluation of why you feel guilty and what is the cause of the guilt. And then that can help you begin to work your way towards letting go of guilt. And to remember that it is a process, it is a journey. It is not a one-time thing. It's not something that, oh, as soon as I do it, I'm going to just be okay with it. No, no, no. Sometimes it takes time to let go of guilt. It's a process that you go through. Having someone to talk to about the things you feel guilty about can also help you with knowing the healthiest way to respond. If you don't have a loved one to talk to, you can always speak to a professional. Okay? So now let's now go over down to the conversation about shame. All right? So give me a second. Let me pull up my notes. Shame. Okay, so now let's talk about shame. I'm sure many of us are familiar, just the same way we've talked about guilt, we're also familiar with the concept of shame. So when we talk about shame, shame is more of a self-evaluative feeling. So it is like a feeling of humiliation and distress when you are conscious of your own foolish behavior. So, and the thing is, that foolish is not like an insult, it's just like you've done something wrong and you look at it, it's like, oh my goodness, I am so embarrassed at what I have done. Just as much as shame can be a feeling from the inside, people can have a way of making you feel ashamed. So the same way people can make you feel guilt and manipulate guilt, people can also manipulate shame as well. And shame can be so malignant that it destroys people's self-esteem. So we're going to get into the malignant nature of shame. But first of all, let us talk about what shame is. So shame is just this painful feeling of humiliation and distress that comes when you become conscious of something that you have done wrong. It is very possible for people to feel shame and feel guilt at the same time. And sometimes we might think that, oh, I feel guilt, when what we actually feel is shame. Whatever. What we actually feel is shame. So shame is when we look within ourselves and then say to ourselves, like, oh, this kind of thing that I've done is something that I don't feel proud of. I'm not happy about the way I've shown up in a particular situation. This is not the type of person that I am, and I would love to do better. The same thing with guilt. Shame can be real, shame can be perceived, and shame can also be imagined. So you can also sit back and be like, oh my goodness, what if I do this and do that and do that? Someone will not start feeling like I'm so ashamed of myself. Oh my God, oh my God. And you find yourself reacting just like, oh my goodness, and you're covering your face like, oh, that's so shameful. That's definitely not something I'd want to do or something I'd want to associate myself with or a way that I want to be regarded in the public. So it is important to also ask yourself that question, okay, this is what I feel shame for. Is this shame really my shame, or is it shame that has been, one, projected onto me from other people? Two, is it shame that I've perceived because the way these people are treating me around here, they're making me feel like I should be ashamed of myself, or, the way this person is talking to me is trying to cause me shame? Or three, is it because of something real that has happened where you have done something that is, in fact, shameful? There are times when, because of who we are, okay, let's say the community that we're in, there are some things that we do that in our community, people will say, oh, mother, that's a shameful thing to do. Maybe the way we dress, the decisions that we make, the places that we go to, the people we associate ourselves with. Someone will be like, oh my goodness, that's a very shameful thing to do. And then we absorb that shame and feel like that's how we should feel about ourselves or how we should feel about the situation. So it's important that as you're doing the evaluation of guilt, you're also doing that same evaluation with shame. Should I be ashamed of this thing? And what is the thing that has caused me to be ashamed of myself or ashamed of the situation? There are times in childhood where even shame can become the core of a person's problem. I know this because when I work with people who have like low self-esteem, people who are struggling with confidence, the root of that, even have problems with forming friendships, building relationships, being compassionate to themselves, being kind to themselves, feel undeserving of love. When you sit with them at the root of it, there is a whole lot of shame that resides within them. And the reason why they feel this amount of shame is because when they were growing up, anytime they tried to do something that has to do with loving themselves, accepting themselves, seeing themselves for who they really are, someone around them will tell them, no, don't do that, you're embarrassing me, or that is a shameful thing, hide yourself, you're not supposed to dress like that, you're not supposed to do this way. Especially as women, there's a lot of shame that comes into being raised as a woman. When you're growing up as a woman, the moment you see that, you're like, when you're doing something, women are not supposed to do that. Women are not supposed to act like this. Women are not supposed to do this. So you grow up feeling a lot of shame for who you are and how you choose to express yourself, even your femininity, because we're all women, but we're not all the same type of women. We're not all the same. Like all women must act and behave a certain type of way. Every other woman has a way of expressing her femininity. Some women will love to wear makeup, some women will not love to wear makeup. Some women will love to wear skirts, some women want to wear trousers. Some women want to wear the mountain, some women want to wear a bicycle. So women have different ways of expressing their being as human beings and as women. But the thing is, that community can be so hard on women when it's not you that you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't do this, you can't do that. So people then start to shrink and restrict themselves and limit their own personhood, and then begin to feel ashamed that when they get older, instead of them to be able to openly express who they are, what it is that they want to do, how they feel, what they then begin to feel is a lot of shame. They feel so much shame. When they walk into a room, people might not even say anything about you. People might not even be looking at you with a negative idea. But because you've already been made to feel ashamed of yourself or ashamed of who you are at the core of your being, when you walk into spaces, you then begin to perceive other people's behaviors and attitude as if they are looking at you from a shameful perspective. Sometimes the way we think other people see us is really just a reflection of how we see ourselves. And because we see ourselves in these ways, we don't think everybody sees us that way. But it's most likely not true because then it's like you haven't had this conversation with this person to know if this is really how they feel. You're just working based on assumption and you're working based on how you see yourself and how you perceive the world. So it is important that if you're a person who is struggling, if you're a person who is struggling with like self-love and self-acceptance, and you're a person who's struggling with loving yourself, seeing yourself, appreciating yourself, and you sit and ask yourself this question: am I ashamed of myself? And if I am, why do I feel ashamed of myself? Is it because of something I have done that is worthy of being ashamed of? Or is it because of somebody else's projection of shame onto me? That because I don't fit into an ideal, because I don't fit into an idea, because I don't live up to a certain standard, I should definitely be ashamed of myself. Chances are that that's usually not true, that they are just causing you or asking you to live up to their own perception of what they think is the right way to do. So when you're doing this work of overcoming shame in your life, the same way we talked about guilt, you need to begin to evaluate why and the source of your shame. And if it is something that you should definitely feel ashamed of, like, oh, maybe you've assaulted someone, abused a person, or done something wrong to somebody else that is not welcome, appreciated, or respectful, you need to apologize, acknowledge it, take accountability for it, and apologize for it. So, and atone for it, because if you don't, it will continue to follow you and haunt you. But like I said before, atonement does not necessarily then mean you now get to overcompensate for it. There needs to be a limit. Okay, I've done something, but even when people go to jail, there's no that on my 50% somebody will go to jail for life, because that one, the atonement for now is very difficult. But even like that, there are times when people commit very heinous and terrible crimes, and they spend the rest of their life trying to atone for it in different ways. So you need to think about, okay, if I this thing I've done, how can I atone for it? But I was saying with jail, like even with jail, there's a limit to the jail time that you can get for certain things. So even you as a person need to understand what is the right level of atonement for this particular thing, and how can I begin to change my behavior so that this shameful thing I have done does not repeat itself again. But if the shame that doesn't have to do with you, but is projected onto you because of somebody else's standards or expectations of you, and sometimes somebody else's shame. So some people can feel shame for something. Oh, this is something that's embarrassing. Like, oh my goodness, you don't know how to use a fork and knife. And then once upon a time in their life, they didn't know how to use a fork and knife, and people used to laugh at them, and so they felt ashamed about that. And when you now meet you, you don't know how to use a fork and knife, they now start laughing at you. They now project their own shame onto you. It's important to sit back and evaluate and separate yourself from that, because you cannot carry somebody else's shame. When I talk to people, women are just people who have generally experienced abuse of a kind, either sexual abuse or physical abuse of a kind. One thing I find is that they tend to feel a lot of shame because they think that the reason why such abuse happened to them is because of something that they had done. So it's a combination of both guilt and shame. Shame as to what somebody else has done to them or what has been done to them, and then guilt because they feel a sense of responsibility for it. And one thing I try to work with them is to understand that that shame is not yours to carry, and that guilt is not yours to carry, because it isn't you that has done something shameful and something that you feel guilty for. Somebody else has done it, but they did it to you. So it isn't yours to bear and it isn't yours to carry. So then we do the work on helping them to dissociate themselves from that that shame identity that they carry and say, I should have, or it was because of, no, it's not because of you. So that evaluation of your emotions is so important, because then you need to give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar and say what is yours. So that you don't carry what does not belong to you and then use that to define your reality. Now, like I said for with guilt, when you're dealing with guilt, having somebody to talk to, like a professional or a person you trust and feel safe with, is very important. It's the same thing with shame. Having somebody to talk to can really help you understand what is something to feel ashamed of and what is something to not feel ashamed of, and how to then begin to work through that shame. And self-forgiveness is also another important tool when it comes to dealing with shame. Now, self-forgiveness can apply to when you've done something shameful and to when somebody else has projected shame onto you. Because sometimes people carry the shame that they think is theirs, but really isn't theirs, and it's so heavy and they feel so responsible for it. And I tell them that, okay, that if I tell you to dissociate yourself from it and give it to somebody else, it wouldn't work. So I tell them, forgive yourself. Forgive yourself for not showing up for yourself the ways that you think you should have shown up for yourself. And then learn, okay, how else do I think I can protect myself? By the time they're able to do that self-forgiveness work, it then makes it easier for them to be able to say, this is not my responsibility and this is not my fault. So self-forgiveness can be a very helpful tool when it comes to letting go of shame. So that's what I have for guilt and shame. And like I said before, I really touched on that self-blame part, because with shame and guilt, that self-blame will still come into conversation, because we'll try to take accountability for things that are not ours. We'll feel ashamed for things and feel guilty for things that have nothing to do with us, but somebody else's action. And that's self-forgiveness and having conversations with other people, maybe a professional or a loved one, can begin us down that pathway of healing. But avoidance is never the solution to the problem. Rather, a confrontation of your feelings, a direct addressing of them, and acknowledgement of not just your feelings, but how you may have made somebody else feel, can help you down that path to healing. All right, so that is what I have for my presentation. If you have any questions, table is open. Okay.
I don't know about any other person, but I have learned a lot in the last 40 plus minutes. As a matter of fact, my book is filled. Thank you so much, Amanda. Thank you very much for this session. So I just want to quickly move. Hello?
Hear from, can you hear me? Sorry.
Yes, I can.
My phone is freezing. Let me just leave that join back. Just give me a second, okay?
Okay. All right, I think her network is breaking up there. Let's just give her a few minutes to come back. If we learned something, please drop an emoji in the chat box. I can see some questions here, and I'm just waiting for Amanda to come back in so I can ask what those questions are. If you have any other questions for her, please drop it in the chat box while we wait. Okay, seems like it's taking quite a while. I apologize for the delay. Please, let's get our questions ready, because I have I have a number of questions to ask here on my own. And I have every intention to ask my questions. So if you know that you don't want me to take the entire time allotted for asking questions, please drop your questions in the chat box so we don't lose it. I can see about 4 or 5 questions here at the moment.
Hello?
Okay, so Amanda is back.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, yes, we can.
I'm so sorry. My phone started overheating and froze, so I just moved to my laptop right now. Okay, so thank you guys so much for that. So do you guys have any questions for me?
Well, I'm sure a lot of people do have questions. I'm going to start with the questions in the chat box here.
Mhm.
So the first one says, how do we find the balance? I want to believe this person must have heard when you were talking about finding out how to, figure out what's real, what isn't. Although
Mm-hmm.
I would like more context to this question. So Shalewa, if you're
Yep.
still on the call,
Yes, please just let me know what you mean by
please
balance. So
let us know
balanced.
what you mean by how do we find the balance. The next question here is, okay, I see someone raising their hand. Asads. Okay, you have the floor, please.
All right. Hi, Amanda. So this is Dari. Funny enough,
Hi.
I just saw a question. I saw some interesting questions in the chat, but my own question is just more around um just for those in the call right now that might feel guilty as a result. Let me give context, right? I met someone some years ago that told me like, she was the toxic person in the relationship, and I was really impressed because not many people own up to this. Do you get?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just
Mm-hmm.
asking for those that are the bad people,
Mm-hmm.
maybe they are the toxic ones in relationships,
Mm-hmm.
uh, they are the toxic bosses. How do they also deal with guilt? I don't know if you have any tips for people in that category,
Yeah.
basically. Yeah, how do they deal with the guilt, or maybe it was a mistake in a failed relationship, just
Yeah.
a similar thing. Yeah, like you're the one that made the mistake, you were the bad person. How
Yeah.
does one do that? Yeah,
Deal
so
with
that's
the
my
guilt. Yeah. Thank you for that question. So it's precisely what I mentioned before when I was talking about if the guilt or the shame you feel is real. Excuse me. That it's important to acknowledge it. So what this person has done is that they've been able to own up and say, okay, yes, I was the one who messed up. I was the one who did something wrong. And that is the first step, really. To be able to acknowledge it is important. To be able to say, okay, I know where I messed up and I take responsibility for this is very important. And it's a good starting point. Then the second thing after acknowledgement is if you have the capacity to reach out to the person that you must have offended to apologize for what you've done, that's also very helpful as well. So if you know, and I tell people this, that it doesn't matter how many years has gone by. Excuse me. It doesn't matter how many years has gone by. Some people will be like, but man, it's been such a long time now. What? There's no point why I'm reaching out to this or why I'm talking about that. But you'll be so surprised how even just 7 years down the line, being able to reach out to someone and say, I'm so sorry for how you treated me, can bring them and you so much healing and so much peace of mind. So it doesn't matter how many years has gone by, it doesn't matter how much time has passed. If you can be able to access this person and say to them, hey, I remember when we were in school together, we were working together, we were in church together, or in mosque together, or when we were this, I was not kind to you. When we were in a relationship, I was not great to you, I was not good to you, and I made you feel this way. And don't just generalize it. I'm so sorry for what I did. No, no, no. Be specific about what it is that you know that you did wrong and apologize for that. It can help you immensely because you've acknowledged it and you've taken responsibility for it and you've taken accountability. If the person is willing to talk, have a conversation. If they're not willing to talk, that's okay. Let them be. Because you can't, because you want to, stop feeling bad, then go and scatter somebody else's peace of mind. Sometimes it's just best to drop the apology and just be like, okay, if you're ever open to having a conversation, I am in a place where I'm ready to talk, but I'm not going to force you to do that. So just sending a message, reaching out to them, making a call can be helpful as well. But that's also if the person is not no contact. If they're not talking to you at all, they set a boundary and they've said, please don't ever speak to me again, don't ever contact me, respect their boundaries. But if they haven't, please make the effort to reach out, take accountability for what you did and apologize. Now, like I said before in the call, sometimes your own apology to other people saying, okay, you know what, I forgive you, or even taking accountability for how you treated somebody else might not be enough because you also have to forgive yourself. So doing that work of self-forgiveness is also a helpful part. Being able to say, okay, I messed up and I'm disappointed in myself, but I forgive myself for the person that I was before. Forgiveness is two ways. It's two parts. It's not just about being able to acknowledge the behavior, it's also the change in your behavior. So you can't come up and say, I'm sorry for what I did, and then go back and do the same thing again. Then you're not really sorry. And you can't apologize to yourself and say, oh my God, I'm forgiving myself for this wrong thing I've done. And then when the situation presents itself, you repeat the same behavior all over again. Then you're not truly wanting to change. Forgiveness is best backed by behavior change, especially when it has to do with the work of self-forgiveness. So changing your behavior and making the resolve to be better, knowing what you did wrong, and then learning to do better will help you overcome that feeling of shame and guilt. I do hope that answers your question.
Well, Barry, did you answer your question?
Oh, yes, it did. Thank you so much, Amanda.
You're welcome.
I think we should answer the questions in the chat box. I think they're really heavy. Yeah, thank you. Also, I just want to remind everyone that this is also still a safe space. So please, yeah.
Thank you so much, Dari. All right, so I'm going to move to the first question in the chat box from Pauta. I really hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. If I am not, I am sorry in advance. So she asked, what is the difference between shame and guilt? Can you just quickly run over that for us?
Okay, so like I said in the beginning, guilt is when you feel bad for something that you should have done, but you didn't do, or it's when you feel bad for something you should have done that you didn't do, or something that you shouldn't have done that you ended up doing. So guilt is more attached to a sense of responsibility. Then when we then come to talk about shame, shame is more of a self-evaluative behavior that has to do with something that you've done that you feel embarrassed about. So maybe you've treated someone a certain way and you're like, oh my goodness, I can't believe I did that. I feel so ashamed of myself because it didn't live up to the standard of what is right, what is good, or what is true. So you do something unkind to someone, you do something not good to someone, and that is not an approvable, in air quotes, behavior. Shame can also come from societal expectations of how you are supposed to comport yourself, carry yourself, or execute different tasks or behavior. So if you do something that is not approved of in your community, people can then make you feel ashamed of that. So shame is more of I don't feel good about the thing that I have done. It's more of a feeling that you have within yourself of I don't feel good about what I've done. I don't feel good about how I've presented myself. I don't feel good about how I've acted, and I feel ashamed of myself. So it's like a disappointment within oneself. So guilt is more action based, things that you you did, things that you did or did not do, while shame is more feeling based about how you have done something. Does that make sense? It can be, the two of them can sometimes conflict each other, but just think about guilt from a point of responsibility and action, and shame from a place of emotion and self-evaluation, how I see myself in relation to my own standards and in relation to my community. So, and also how I judge myself. So how do I see myself? How do I evaluate my own behavior or my own actions when I look at it and how I have carried myself out? So shame is self-evaluative, whilst guilt is action-based and a sense of responsibility.
Thank you so much, Amanda, for that. I have added to my notes again. All right, so from Kauta again, wow, she definitely has a lot of questions, which is a very good thing. She's asking, how do I let go of shame projected from others?
Okay. So shame projected from others can be very malignant, because even when the person who is projecting that shame onto you has gone, their voice can become your own inner voice, where whenever, let's say, for example, now you go outside, you put on a dress, you feel very comfortable in it, and then you go outside and people are like, why are you dressed like that? You should be ashamed of yourself. Why would you come outside and be looking like that? You would then go back home and then look at yourself and feel that, oh, more at the core of who I am, man, there's something wrong with me. There's something wrong with the way I dress. And that's another thing for the person who was asking about the difference between shame and guilt. With shame, when you think about shame, it's always, there's usually this feeling of there is something wrong with who you are as a person, as a result of either the decision or the action that you have carried out of me. So it still boils down to that same self-evaluation, but seeing yourself from a place of something is wrong with you. Something is bad about you. Something has spoiled within you. So you need to now hide yourself, isolate yourself, or not, or that part of yourself should not be seen, shown, accepted, or welcomed. So it's something that should be hidden away from everybody else. So that's something that characterizes shame. So when you now go back, you start to feel like there's something wrong with me. So when it comes to the evaluation, if you are a person who has a very strong sense of self, you can talk yourself out of that shame by being able to evaluate that this thing I feel ashamed of, that somebody, is it something that I should be ashamed of? What exactly is wrong with this thing that I have done? And sit with yourself to analyze it objectively. Is there something wrong with it? Do I even feel that according to my own standards that there is something wrong with it? There are some people who feel ashamed of piercings and tattoos. So if you go out and you have a piercing, they will look at you in a certain type of way. They will mock you and try to make you feel like there's something wrong with you having tattoos or piercings. So you might go back home and start to feel like, oh my goodness, I should be ashamed of myself. I never should have had this piercing or tattoos. People are not going to accept me for who I am and have presented myself. But if you sit with yourself, you can ask yourself, okay, is there really something wrong with having tattoos and piercings? Or does that person just think that there is something wrong? So is it my own shame, or is it their shame that is being projected onto me? So that evaluation is very important for you to sit with yourself to know, is it according to my own standards that this thing should be shameful of, or is it somebody else's standard that they are asking me to live by? Now, if you're not a person who has that strong sense of self, but you're in a place where you have enough clarity to make this differentiation between what is yours and what is another person's shame projected onto you, talk to a professional, speak to a friend, so that they can have that conversation with you and then help you make the distinction between the both of them. When you're able to make that distinction, it is important for you to then consistently reinforce this idea and this thought in your head that, okay, there's nothing wrong with me. Some people just may not like the way that I am in the world. There's nothing wrong with my tattoos. I don't see anything wrong with it. But then this person will not like it, or this person does not approve of people who wear tattoos or who have piercings. So it is important to make that distinction between what is your shame and what is the shame of another person projected onto you. Doing it on your own through your own self-evaluation of your standards and your societal standards, and then also having a conversation with a friend or a professional. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much for that, Amanda. I
You're
want to
welcome.
believe Carter's answers and the questions have been answered. There's another question in the chat box, and she said, "How do I stop feeling guilty about cutting off people who I don't want in my life?"
Okay. So when it comes to this concept of cutting off people, yeah, one thing I noticed is that when people want to cut people off they don't want in their life, what they do is they just stop talking to them. And they just like say, I've cut you off. But they don't have a conversation with people. They don't address the issue that has come up with the cutting off. Communication is very important, even when it gets to a point where you have to separate yourself from somebody else. Just cutting off a person is not helpful. I know sometimes we'll say, okay, I've told this person quite a number of times that, if they continue to that, they are doing this to me, they're hurting my feelings. There's no point having a conversation. I'm tired of talking about it. I'm tired of talking about it. And then you just ghost. There's a higher likelihood for you to feel bad if you just disappear without talking to them about it than if you don't. So if you know that you're cutting off people, you want to cut people off of your life, have a conversation with them about it. Even if they are toxic people and unhealthy people to be around, tell them. And sometimes it doesn't even have to be a conversation. Sometimes it can just be a message and just be like, you know what? I've mentioned this thing to you before. You don't listen to me. I don't think I can continue to have a conversation with you. I'm going to just separate myself from you. And that's it. And let it go. Now, this doesn't take away the fact that there are some situations where there's just no point having a conversation with them at all. Like it's just best to just leave it and separate yourself of them from them. But in those types of situations, what I encourage people to do is evaluate the relationship. If the person is just an acquaintance or someone you met, a colleague at the office, where you don't have you don't have emotional connection to them, that both of you don't have experiences, shared experiences together, history together, it's like, it's not even that serious, man. Let me just create my space from them and keep it moving. But if it's somebody that you have a long-term relationship with, a family, a friend for a couple of years, a relationship that's not working out, don't just ghost and then go away. Because when you ghost, there's going to be a guilt that will follow you because deep down inside, you know that you did not handle this thing the right way. Send them a message and let them know, like, I'm not dealing with this anymore. This is why it's also important for us to have boundaries in our lives. That if people are treating us a certain way, that we communicate to them that I don't like the way that you are treating me. It doesn't make me feel good. It doesn't make me feel happy. And that if you continue to do this way, I'm going to have to reevaluate our friendship and separate the both of us. So when you're setting those boundaries, that you are able to communicate to them what your how do I say, what your reaction, what the consequence of breaking your boundary is going to be. So please, I encourage people. It's as harsh as this might sound, it is a very cowardly move to cut people off without giving them an explanation and a reason why, especially when these are long-term relationships, friendships, connections, things with like siblings as well. Because I see people do it all the time. They just vanish. They wouldn't say a word. They wouldn't say anything. They wouldn't communicate with them. They wouldn't even, and even when you ask them, they'll say, oh yeah, but I've complained about it. It's like, and when they say they've complained, it's that they just said, I don't like it or don't do this to me, and then they leave it alone. They don't really go into detail to say, this thing that you've done to me, I don't appreciate it, and express how it made them feel. And sometimes we avoid doing that because we think that when we address things with people, it should change their behavior. So we're like, oh, what's the point of talking about it when nothing is going to change? That is not the purpose of expressing your feelings. The purpose of expressing your feeling, well, sometimes it might change behavior, but number two, the most important thing is to advocate for yourself and to use your own voice to be heard. Now, the person might not hear you, but you hearing yourself speak up for yourself is such a huge confidence booster and such a huge strengthening experience that helps you set boundaries in other spaces. So if you only talk to people about how they treat you simply because you want it to change the way that they act towards you, you are not going to be having a lot of conversation because number one, you don't have the power to change people's behavior. You're not that powerful. If it was possible that when we complain about something, it's going to change the way a person behaves, then all of us should be witches now. Then we're Jesus Christ and we are God. Then we have the power of the tongue to be able to move mountains in a literal way. But we are not like that. Realistically, you cannot change behavior by complaining about it, but you can build your confidence and your own strength and set your boundaries with consequences
when you speak up. And you can also teach people how to treat you. Because when you stay silent, people don't know what is and what isn't for you. So speak up. So when it comes to that part of guilt, it is important for you to address the situation. Now let's go to part two, this person's problem. So you've now ended up cutting the person off. You are still going to sometimes feel guilty because if you're a people pleaser, there's a part of you that just really wants everybody to be okay and everybody to be happy. So when you cut somebody off, you start to feel bad, like, oh my goodness, was I being harsh? Was I being mean? Did I not care? Was I a bad person? Was this too extreme? I don't want to be doing something that's so extreme like that. That's not fair. And stuff. So there's that feeling. What I'll say to you is that sit with it. The guilt will pass. Number one, the guilt would pass. Number two, as the guilt is passing, it is important for you to remember and remind yourself why you decided to cut this person off, why you decided to set this boundary with this person. They were disrespecting you, they were not treating you nicely, they were not honoring you well. Your life has gone down different paths, and the both of you are just not thinking about it, going down life in the same way. The choices they've made are just hurtful and harmful, not just to you by extension, but also to them as well. Remind yourself why, because sometimes we also have amnesia. Somebody will treat us badly, and because we feel bad and we feel guilty, we'll then continue to tolerate those behavior, or we'll welcome them back into our lives. Don't let guilt cause you to make space for people who treat you poorly. Sit with your guilt. It will pass, especially when you know that the reason for setting this distance between you and this person is something that is warranted, where you've set boundaries, you've had conversations, you've communicated with them, and it hasn't turned out to, they have not acknowledged it, they have not taken responsibility, and their behavior has not changed. Then this person is going to continue causing me harm. I'm just going to remove myself. So take that initiative and take yourself out of it. So two things for you to do. Number one, don't run away from your feeling of guilt. Feel the feeling and remind yourself of the reason why you decided to put space between you and the persons that you have cut yourself off from. And for people who want to also create distance between themselves and people who are not healthy for them, if these are long-term friendships, relationships, or family dynamics, say it to them. Let them know that this is the reason why, and then go on ahead to then create the distance. Sometimes it really isn't cutting them off. It's not that you have to cut them off entirely. Sometimes it's just creating distance. Like, I'm not going to spend as much time with you anymore. I'm not going to invest that much effort into our friendship. I'm just going to take a step back from our relationship. This communication really does matter, because there are lots of people out there who have lost friendships, but till today, they don't know why. They literally don't know why. And it's because, and that causes them to even have more issues afterwards. And you, the person, the cutter is like, there's a reason why I decided to, you're not healthy, but you're not communicating to the other person what it is that they have done to bring you to the point where you decided to cut them off. And these people usually is from either a close friend, a best friend, or a close family member that's just not communicating with them anymore. So if you feel that someone around you is not treating you well, tell them and let them know. And if you want to create distance with them, let them know. But evaluate the relationship before you then make a decision as to how you either create distance or sever the relationship. Yeah.
That was really insightful. Really, really insightful. Thank you so much, Amanda. So I want to move to the next question. I have some questions as well, but I want to make sure that our participants are eating good before I even move to myself at all. So someone asked, can I maintain friendships after letting go?
If you've let go, then why are you maintaining a friendship? Or is it letting go of the friendship or letting go of guilt?
I want to believe the person means letting go of guilt, shame. Like, when they have done that, can they like go ahead to maintain friendships, like maybe healthy friendships?
I mean, if it's a healthy friendship, yes, you can go ahead to maintain it, but take it slow. Don't just expect things to go back to the way they were. They can never go back to the way they were because something significant has happened. So accept it for what it is and start the friendship over, building it from a much more honest and open perspective, and then taking into consideration the thing that caused the both of you to fall apart in the first place. like I said, in the path of letting go, it's not just about acknowledging the behavior, but it's also changing the behavior that brought you to that situation. So if you know that you're not ready to change your behavior, please just leave the person alone in the peace of mind that they've already found. Yeah. And also it depends on if the person is also willing to start the friendship. So sometimes people can forgive you and just be like, there are people that have hurt me and they reach out to me and I'm like, thank you so much for forgiveness, but I personally don't want to be friends with you. So you can gain forgiveness, but the other person has to be willing to want to build the friendship with you over again.
Thank you so much. The person who sent this question has replied in the chat box, and they said, please not guilt. Someone has their hand up. I'm going to give the person the room to want to speak. After which, I will let this person just speak a bit so we have like some context to their question. You have the floor. Person raising their hands, Dari.
Oh yeah. Another question is around the guilt that comes with feeling like a failure, right?
Yeah.
So just permit me, I'm just speaking based on some of the reasons why I wanted us to have this session so that those that are shy can still get answers, right? So it's around the guilt that comes with failure. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
failure from a marriage in case someone is divorced, feeling
Mm-hmm.
like they failed, maybe they've had two, three divorce, feeling like a failure. And
Mm-hmm.
also the guilt that comes from failing in terms of maybe putting in their best and just doing things well. And then they look back in hindsight as to, I could have done this. I don't know if you understand what I'm saying. When they begin to wish they could go back in time to fix things. How does
Yeah.
one get out of that limbo? And then lastly, guilt that comes from um, blaming oneself. And I think I can relate to this, right? Before I started Asads, 2 weeks before Asads started, my uncle called me. I didn't pick up. And then 3, 4 days later, he died.
Mm.
And, I kept blaming myself as to what was that conversation going to be like? Like, if I picked up that call, is there
Mm-hmm.
a possibility it will be alive? And I just sensed, like, in my journey in the mental hospital, I've met people that felt, you know, they couldn't pick up the signs. I've met people that, someone randomly just told them they appreciate them. They didn't understand. Only for the next day, the person jumped inside the Third Milan Bridge.
Yeah.
Basically, so that guilt of, and this person, I saw how a pin message is still the messages that person sent to her. Do you get what I'm saying? Like that is still pinned.
Wow.
She reads those messages every single time. And I just feel like people have that guilt of that feeling that they wish they could have done things better to shift things. So how does
Yeah.
one deal with those types of guilt, basically?
So when it comes to the guilt that comes with grief, what I tell people, and um this is not uncommon when people lose loved ones, they're like, if I had been there, if I had. The truth is, as all of us are here now on the phone, we're all talking right now. None of us knows what's going to happen 2 hours from now. We really don't. And there are times when you've called somebody, you missed their call, and then you're able to call them back, and then you pick up the phone. Your absence or your presence does not have that much of a significant influence on the death and life of somebody else. That's too much responsibility to, to put on yourself. You never know the future. I might leave here now, and as I'm going, because right now I'm sitting in a car in a parking lot. What if, as I'm going right now, this entire parking lot just falls to the ground, crushes me, and I die? There's nothing anybody on this call can do in this particular moment right now that will prevent that from happening. If I had been calling, if I was driving out of this place now and unless I was calling Dari on the phone and then Dari didn't answer and this place just came crashing down and then crashes me and killed me, what would Dari have done on the call while he's talking to me now that would have prevented that bad thing from happening? Nothing. Nothing. The guilt that comes from grief is just that negotiation that we have with life because of how much we miss the person that has gone away. And it can be difficult to accept the reality of they did not come back. And it even happens, even when we lose things in our life, like a pen and bio. Maybe if I had just put it back, maybe if I had just, that hindsight, we look at things to think, okay, how much control that what could we have done in the past to prevent the future? Because we don't want to feel the pain. We really don't want to feel the pain. Like I see this even with children that lose their parents in childbirth. If I had not been born, my mother would have been alive. That's too much responsibility. There is no direct correlation between your birth and your mother's death that has to do with your action or inaction because you were a helpless person. So we sometimes take on the responsibility of fate. That is things that have nothing to do and are not within our own power to control, and think to ourselves that if we had done something about it, it would have made a difference. Nothing that anybody's going to do on this call right now would make a difference as to if any of us who is on the road or who is at home goes to bed and wakes up the following morning. Absolutely nothing. Because our lives are in the control of forces that are beyond our understanding. And sometimes they belong to us. We are the ones that are in control of it and the decisions that we make. So I say to people who are dealing with grief that negotiation with life in terms of looking at the hindsight and saying, maybe if I had, it's fruitless because all it does is hold you prisoner to the past. It holds you prisoner and trapped in situations that you had no control over. And the best way to move on from that is to begin to accept that you have no control, that there was nothing you could have done. And sometimes that is a very difficult thing to come to terms with, that there was not, like, it's just the helplessness that comes with accepting the death of a loved one can be incredibly overwhelming. And then when people don't have hindsight bias, then they take it as life has something against me because it has to make sense. Either I had control of it or it was intentionally done towards me. But the truth is that bad things happen and there's nothing that we could have done or we did that would have affected or impacted that situation. And it is just to be able to come to that acceptance. And it's such a deep, painful acceptance to come to. But it is the reality, whether you accept it or not, it is actually the reality in front of you. That this loss would have happened and that the control you had over it was very little. And this is also when it is something that you have absolutely no control over. So the best to do is to just accept and come to terms with the fact that in life, there are things that will be so painful that will happen to you that is inevitable and that there was nothing anybody could have done to make it happen. That there is nothing anybody could have done to prevent it from happening, and sitting with that truth. It's a very heavy, heavy truth to sit with, but it's an important one too. And to move forward in life with that awareness, knowing that, okay, if I know that there is a certain amount of life that is not within my control, then let me focus on the ones that are within my control. What can I do going forward? What can I do? If I know that no matter what I do or how much how much money I make, how much present I am, how supportive people can still die without me doing anything, being there, picking up their call, not even answering it. Because there are also people who say, there are some people who are like, I just spoke to this person right now. How did they end up passing away? So accepting that helpless part about your humanity is an important part to helping you move forward from that guilt. It is not your fault and it is not your responsibility. And I recommend working with a grief counselor because it can be very difficult to integrate such pain with your present life so that you can be able to move forward and to even know how to carry that wisdom and interpretation of life, that awareness of existence into your life going forward. So how do I then move forward knowing that there is a certain amount of life I don't have control over? You would need help to move forward. So speak to a grief counselor about that. Now, when it comes to failure that has to do with work that you've not done well, a failed relationship, let's say a failed divorce, it can be very terrible when your marriage, especially multiple marriages, don't work out. You know, when it comes to relationship, it takes two to tango. So the divorce is not just of one person's fault. Sometimes it is of a thing that you did or a thing you did not do. And feeling that guilt is a sign of responsibility. So sit with yourself and ask yourself, what exactly did I do or did I not do in this relationship that caused it to fall apart? Acknowledge it, take responsibility for it, forgive yourself for what you could not do, and then begin to make steps forward as to how you can then do better so the past does not repeat itself again. The same thing goes with failure when you failed in school or at work, or you look back at your life and you're like, wow, all the time I had, I didn't do this, I didn't. That is more regret, far much more than it's skills, because it's time you cannot get back. It doesn't pay you to sit in that past and just sit and think, oh, if I had known, I should have, I could have, all the time I have, I could have done this. You forget that even in those moments when you're sitting down with regret, you are still alive. You are still alive. And that this moment that you are sitting in to regret, in 10, 15 years, you can look back at that very moment and still, this is a moment where you can either create regrets for your future self. So then think about your future self. If I don't want to regret what happened, if I don't want to help experience regret in the future, how can I make sure that my present is okay? So be honest with yourself to be able to face the things that you feel regret for, how you didn't show up for yourself, the ways that you didn't work out because of things that were within your control. Because there are some times when some of us do the best we can and life just doesn't deal us a very fair card. Like yesterday, I was playing Ludo with my brother on the beach and my friend. Can you imagine? Like, they played the full game. My brother won. The whole time I kept trying to throw sixes. I did not throw. So even when they gave me extra chance, they said, oh, I just throw multiple times. I would throw and throw. I'll still not get a six. And I was just like, what kind of, did you people cheat this board? But it's the same, like sometimes you might do your best, show up the way you want to, and life just doesn't deal you the fairest of cards. But it isn't because of your lack of trying. It's just the way life rolls. Sometimes it's so unfortunate. Some people deal with more grief in their life than many of us. Some of us would never experience the amount of grief and loss that some people have. Life is unfair, but it is also fair. So if you are in a place where you have put in your effort and it didn't work out in your favor, sitting back and then feeling terrible and saying, oh my goodness, life has been unkind to me, keeps you stuck in the past. It doesn't help you move forward. And as you're stuck in that past, time is still moving forward. You are still getting older, things are still moving ahead of you, people are still changing, growing, things are still happening. So the best to do is to acknowledge what is within your power, acknowledge what isn't within your power, and then make the step forward and be like, I tried my best here. It didn't work out for me, but that doesn't mean I'm going to give up. I'm just going to try to keep trying and to see, okay, the ones that even did work out for me, can I just continue to build on that? Because if you look only on your lack and your failures, it will cloud your perspective of reality. So acknowledge your failures, don't dwell in them. Acknowledge your strength, build upon them. All right? Unfortunately, I might not be able to answer everybody's question because I've been here way past longer. I actually need to start heading home now. So I'll just take one more question and then I'll be out of here, okay?
Hey, thank you so much, Amanda.
You're welcome.
Everyone on the, I didn't even ask the 20 questions I had. But I'm going to ask I'm going to ask this last question. And
Okay.
it says, how do I stop feeling guilty about setting boundaries and other things that are healthy for me that might
Mhm.
actually make others feel hurt?
Yeah. Okay. Be okay with other people being disappointed. They'll be fine. Nobody ever died from disappointment. Be okay with
True.
be okay with other people being hurt. It's a difficult thing to do, but you will see that they are fine. And you see, the beautiful thing about boundaries is that when you set them, it really does help you know who is for you and who isn't. Because sometimes you might delude yourself to thinking that just because this person is in my life means that they care about me. No. By the time you start to assert yourself and say, I don't want this, I don't like that, I don't like that, because they no longer have the ability to either treat you a certain way or benefit from you a certain way, they start to leave you. So setting boundaries is good for you because then you can conserve your energy and invest it in people that are genuinely your friends, people that genuinely love you and care about you. And if you set your boundary and somebody feels bad about it, leave them. They will be fine. Like I said before, let the guilt stay. It will pass. And remind yourself why it is important for you to set those boundaries. It's a process. It's not a quick thing that's going to happen that once you set the boundary, you're not going to feel bad about it. No, even when you get familiar with setting boundaries, you will still have those moments where you're just like, oh, did I do too much? Was I doing too much? Am I being too harsh? Remind yourself the reason why you set the boundaries. We can get caught up in our emotions, not wanting to cause other people pain or making them feel bad. And that then causes us to now ignore our own feelings and our own well-being. So remind yourself, even if it means writing it in your notes, I'm setting my boundary with so and so person or for so and so situation. And these are the reasons why. So that when you feel that guilt, you go back and then read everything all over again. It helps. It helps so that you don't delude yourself into thinking that because I've given this person space for 1 or 2 days, they now have sense. People don't change like that. So when you feel the guilt, but remind yourself that one, nobody ever died from hurt and disappointment. Number two, they will be fine. And number three, these are the reasons why these boundaries are necessary for me. And that sometimes even setting boundaries can be helpful for other people. Because some people don't know that they have issues until you now start to set boundaries. That's when like, so this person actually left me, or this person actually stopped talking to me. This person, that's when they will now start sitting back to reevaluate their life. Being close to someone and giving them access into your life is not always love. Sometimes love is letting people go. Sometimes love is setting boundaries. Sometimes love is growing pains. It's not everything that you learn the easy way. Sometimes things you learn them and you learn them from pain. So it's okay. Let people feel pain sometimes. Now, I'm not saying you should go and be T-Pain or that you should just go there and be hurting people left, right, center. No, do it with consideration, but understand that if you need to set a boundary, communicate, set the boundary, and let it be. And when the guilt comes, feel the guilt and remind yourself why. If you don't have the strength to be able to remind yourself why you set those boundaries, call a friend, especially the one that has walked with you through that situation. Like the same way when your ex starts to come and tell you sweet nothings, and you're like, oh my God, he's changed so much. Like he's going to therapy now. He's a better person. Call that best friend of yours that was with you when you were crying so that they can talk sense into you to remember how this person treated you poorly and that it's okay for people to want to be a better version of themselves, but they don't have to do it alongside you. You don't always have to welcome people back into your life simply because they are improving. Let them be and watch them from a distance before you then decide if you want to welcome them back into your life. Yeah.
Thank
All
you.
right, that's it from me.
All right. Thank you so much, Amanda. It was really, really wonderful having you here.
Thank you for
Thank you,
having me
Amanda.
always.
Thank you. We hope to invite you some other time because we couldn't even take all questions. Some hands are raised, and unfortunately, I can't even take that just yet again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You people
So,
should beg Gary and Asads that they should bring me for part two. I would happy when Asads call I answer. So you always have
we
me.
will happily schedule a part two.
No problem. I'll be more than happy to come back and continue the conversation. So maybe some of the questions that were not answered today, we can keep record of it. And that particular session would be a Q&A session fully, far much more than
Okay.
the
All
conversation.
right. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Yes, and have a lovely day.
You too. Bye.
Bye. Okay, I want to believe that we had a wonderful session today. I am so sorry to Scholar, we couldn't take that question, but I want to believe that if I were to try and answer this question from everything we've learned from Amanda today, she has let us know that we should make sure we set boundaries in our friendships, in our relationships, in our connections, every single thing, even in our family, with our parents, with our siblings, we should set boundaries. Remember, speak up. take accountability. It's important that you take out accountability when you know that the issue that you feel guilt or shame for is real. Take accountability. When you apologize, to be specific in your apology. Don't give a general apology. I remember some time back, a friend of mine reached out to me to apologize. And when he sent the apology, I knew that that apology was a broadcast because of the way it was worded. I just knew that this apology was not specific. It wasn't really meant for me. It was probably just doing New Year, New Me, and then I just entered the list. Okay. And of course, I didn't accept the apology. I let that be clear. So whenever we apologize, be specific. Let the person know what you're apologizing for. And when you realize that what you feel guilt or shame for is imagined, it's not real. You're just overthinking it. Relax, breathe. Okay. I really, really want to thank you guys for being on this session till this time. I don't know if Dari has anything to say. Dari, are you still on this call?
Oh yeah, I am. I really just want everyone to just know that regardless of whatever it is that you're dealing with, um, there's literally light at the end of the tunnel, right? You are not your circumstances or your mistakes. And don't let that guilt eat you up, right? So you can follow Amanda on social media pages. You can also follow our platform. She has a group called NDD, so you can follow her just to get more, reach out to her, and we'll try and see how we can have another part two of the session. You could also join us on forum. I believe we'll send a mail, right? Maybe you can work with our Renta so that people can be able to join the forum just to get more of this. So yeah, so that will be all from me. I believe we are done, right? Blessing.
Yes, I believe we are.
All right.
All
Thank
right.
you, everyone.
Thank you guys so much. Until next time.
All right. Bye, everyone.